It's a pleasure for me to introduce George Paleokrassas from Watson Farley. George is known to many of you, I'm sure. He's co-head of the Maritime group and a partner in the firm. And George is going to run a super interesting panel with owners and charterers and banks and other market players. But before we get into that, we're very fortunate because George is going to share a few slides from a thought leadership project that Watson Farley just recently published a couple days ago called the Sustainability Imperative. So, George, I'd like to welcome you. I think you're going to present 2 or 3 slides, and then we're going to kind of pick it up and you'll run the panel.
Yes, thank you very much, Matt, and thank you very much for the invitation. That's right, we launched yesterday our thought leadership report, which we called the Sustainability Imperative. And this was conducted through interviews with 10 senior members of the industry and responses from about 545 senior industry participants, covering all aspects of the ESG. Here, of course, we're focusing on the E element. I just wanted to run through some of the results we got on some of the questions which are pertinent to the issues we'll be discussing in this panel. And I know that Andrew Oates is kindly sort of moving the slides. Thank you, Andrew. So if we just on this slide we've got 3 questions. I'll deal with the one on the left first. The next 2 are actually linked to each other, so hopefully everyone can see this. The first question talks about the technologies which owners and operators are considering supporting or deploying over the next 5 years. And it's quite interesting that there is, that the sort of strategy or technology which came first was performance monitoring systems, followed by technology vessel designs, and then artificial intelligence. But what this shows also is that there are many different technologies being considered, and people seem to be actively engaging in that direction. The next 2 questions, as I said, are linked because they look at the type of alternative fuel sources which will be used in the next 5 and then 10 years. So one sees what clearly in both cases LNG, LPG, CNG comes out first and is viewed from the commentary we received as the transition fuel towards within the energy transition. But then you do see quite significant differences and take up between the 5-year period and the 10-year period. So, for example, biofuels goes from 31 to 47%. Hydrogen as a fuel goes up to 35% from 21%. So there is an expectation that there will be significant movement within that time horizon. Andrew, if you could just move to the next slide, thank you. Then, in terms of, we also ask people to consider who should fund research, because this is certainly one topic we will be discussing during this panel. And by far, the most prominent answer was that people are looking to governments to do this, as to 46%. And again, if we look at, and you can see the difference between the second and third sort of choice and responses to that question. And then if you look at the right-hand question, and we'll just concentrate on the left-hand column, because that's what we will be discussing here, which talks about environmental change. You'll see that balancing the need for regulation or legislation and voluntary initiatives, the industry is saying, or the respondents to our survey are saying that as to 54%, they consider that it should be regulations and legislation which take the lead, as opposed to 46% who consider that those should be voluntary initiatives. So I think these are some of the topics we'll be developing in the discussion we will have now. So if I may introduce now our panelists. We have, in the order I can see people, Tony Gurnee, who's the CEO of Ardmore Shipping, Rasmus Bach Nielsen, Global Head of Fuel Decarbonization at Trafigura, Arlie Sterling, who's the President and Co-founder of Marsoft, and finally, but not least, Evan Uhlick, who's the Head of Ocean Industries North America at D&B Bank. So if I may just start the discussion with, in terms of starting from carbon emissions and looking at what is the appropriate price one should pay for these emissions, as well as who should pay for it and with what mechanism. Just to give a background here, there is an IMO initiative in terms of establishing an international maritime research and development fund, which would impose a levy of $2 on every ton of fuel consumed by every ship, with a view to raising $5 billion for research and development in terms of fuel technologies over a 10-year period. There are also other proposals for a carbon levy and tax, as well as other people who come up with a cap and trade system as well. So I'd like to open this. I think from what I know, our previous discussions, I know Rasmus would like to speak to this because Trafigura have published a proposal which they call a partial fee-based system based on a system of levies and subsidies. So I'll start with Rasmus, and then others can join in.
Okay, thank you very much, George, and thank you for the invite to the forum today, which of course is of super high importance for our industry and the future destiny of it. Just to frame the discussion, Trafigura is a big trading house. We trade 5.5 million barrels of oil with the biggest metals and minerals trader, the biggest LNG trader in the world. And we have about 300 ships on the water on time charter, and we do about 4,000 fixtures per annum. And we have about $60 billion of credit lines. Trafigura is super deeply engaged in this process because we need to decarbonize our infrastructure. And we know that in order to this happen on an equal level playing field, we need to start on the regulatory level. The way the fuels are costing, the lower zero carbon fuels versus the regular transport fuels as of today, and here we're thinking hydrogen-based fuels from Trafigura as the fuels of the future. There's too wide a price gap in order, in our view, for anyone to be able to buy those without having an incentive to do so. Yeah. So what we have, the approach we have taken is to go the regulatory way, because if it doesn't come the regulatory way, no one will be able to afford the zero and low carbon fuels. Although financiers and shareholders and stakeholders are demanding organizations to decarbonize. In our partial fee-based proposal, and I will really try to shorten it down, what it contains, there's three elements. It's from a practical point of view in terms of having a realistic possibility to get through the IMO, although that is a very difficult task in the first place. We have considered a primary part of the funds coming in from putting carbon emissions on higher emitting fuels. If we look at how can that be done, there's about 6 to 8 main transport fuels of today. And we're proposing to create a benchmark of these transportation fuels. Let's low sulfur fuel, high sulfur fuel, MDO, LPG, LNG, where methane slippage, although is unaccounted for, which we think is a mistake. It has to be done on full life cycle assessment basis. And then we have the transport fuels of the future, which we believe should be hydrogen based. And that could be green ammonia or green methanol. So we establish a price benchmark. If charters charter a ship with higher emissions above the benchmark, the charters should be responsible for paying that cost. Yeah. At the same time, if the charters are able to charter a lower carbon emitting ships, they should also be incentivized. That has the chance to drive behavioral change. And contrary to past regulations, there's been no incentive for charters to drive behavioral change. We have two other elements. So here in this proposal, there's a lot of funds collected through a third-party independent body appointed by the IMO, and those funds are supposed, in our view, to stay within the industry. Yeah, we have a small portion of the funds, but charters are paying. Yeah, very important. There's a small part of our proposal that should go to R&D, and a small part of the funds should go to small island states, underdeveloped countries, maybe South American countries who will have significantly increased transportation costs. What we have come, and then I won't speak longer, I know it's a panel, George, but it's just to frame where we are and then what the proposal is, because it's a big proposal for us. We're proposing a carbon levy of $250 to $300 per metric tons, because that's what it costs to implement zero low carbon fuels. Green ammonia has a calorific value 2.2 times less the fuels today. The future price of this as of today, if you were to do a 10-year offtake, would be around 500 euros per metric tons. But the calorific value obviously is 2.2 times less. So there's a huge challenge. Charters for sure will not be able to underwrite it, and the owners yet again would have to pay the bill if there's no regulation. So we believe regulation has to take place on the highest possible level through a carbon levy. Thank you, George. I leave the.
Thank you very much, Rasmus. Now, would someone like to respond to that? Take up take a different line or have a different proposal for this?
Rasmus, just a question about the program that you said $250 to $300 per ton of carbon.
But CO2 equivalent to incentive. Yes, sorry, that's an important definition.
Thanks.
Yeah, I just to jump in, George. I think it's a terrific framework. The number that you mentioned about the price, for the carbon sounds high, but it's got to be at that level, because if it's not, there's no incentive to switch over to the new fuels. I think the other dimension to this is time, and so we need to consider over what period do you phase this in. That gives, if it's phased in appropriately, it would give people enough time to develop technologies, start planning for new building replacements, etc. Because what it'll do is gradually penalize the less efficient ships. Beyond just EEXI and CII, this would have a very powerful effect in pushing older ships out of the market, but they need to be replaced, and that takes time to plan for. So.
Yorgos, maybe I can jump in here and give a little bit of a different thought stream. First of all, I'd like to recognize Rasmus and Trafigura for its thought leadership and putting out a great white paper, if folks haven't read that yet, on this important issue. I certainly don't disagree with any of the needs, and I'm not the expert to comment on the pricing or, for that matter, the mathematical issues. I guess my question is really more about operational and the administration of such an initiative. And this actually speaks to a little bit of the challenge that I think we have as an industry around the various and fragmented stakeholders who are involved here. Again, my thought is that this does need to be IMO driven. They are truly the kind of super, governmental, super regional body that should lead this. I'm just not completely sure that they know that they need to lead this, have been given additional funding or an enhanced mandate to do so, and have the right governance in place to adequately hold the funds, administer the funds, and deal with it that way. Can you just talk a little bit more about how you actually operationalize such an initiative? Because in principle, it seems quite thoughtful. I'm just wondering more about the administration of such a matter.
And you're hitting it straight on the nail. Two elements. Let me start with the regulatory. You have various transport ministers, climate ministers in the world saying they want to decarbonize, but the challenge is they haven't given the IMO member delegates the mandate to go and make change. The IMO member delegates yet are living somewhat in the past from 2013, 2014, where there was an IMO proposal for market-based measures, which a carbon levy is, and they're fearful that it will never happen. Right now, they're in the process realizing that the whole industry is behind if we can do it where the money stays within the industry. Yeah, and also if charters can pay the increased transportation cost, which the charters actually are willing to do. It's the first time ever a trading house like Trafigura has gone forward and say, we want to be regulated. But that's the only way that we can actually decarbonize over time, and rather sooner than later. So you're hitting it straight on with regulators. The transport and climate ministers, they have not provided the mandate to the IMO member delegates. It's a big challenge, and IMO is very, very bureaucratic. And I'm spending a lot of time with NGOs, IMO member states, talking to them, trying to tell them they have to realize this is what the industry needs. This is what the oil majors need. This is what the traders need. This is what we need. The practicality, of course, there's some huge challenges involved. We don't disregard that. And our proposal, while it has been receiving very positive, generally very positive, we also acknowledge it's probably not perfect. But it's, as of today, what we believe is the best thoughts that we can put forward. The practicalities around it is also, should you put a levy on when you buy the bunker? Question mark. We think not. Who will administer that? We think the charters, by being penalized exactly on voyage level, we think that can drive behavioral change towards chartering lower or zero carbon ships, which will then be an incentive for the owners to go and retrofit the technology when it's ready in due course, which is probably 2025. We're very deeply in with MAN on this, I can say. And then how do you really understand how much emissions has been emitted? I would just advocate for the Sea Cargo Charter here, which is the Global Maritime Forum, which has come out trying to create an industry framework for standardized reporting. The EU have their own reporting requirements, which I believe they will incorporate around the EU ETS schemes. Or the reporting requirement is there, but whether they can use that, which they have, to collect money is a different question. Yeah. But it is one of the challenges that needs to overcome. But we believe it's possible because the industry will have 2 to 3 years while regulators clear it to make it tangible and real. So I think it's feasible, but it's nothing that will just come overnight to create that framework. How much emissions has been emitted on a voyage from ballast to load to ballast to discharge?
Just to push you a little bit further on this, then why not a more simpler cap and trade type system that utilizes more of the financial markets and tries to put a price on the carbon emissions? Why have you ruled out that approach?
It will be very hard to predict what the future price of your carbon is, both for the ship owner and the charter, and that will disincentivize investment and transition. Furthermore, if you have that uncertainty, and I'm not saying it cannot happen, maybe somebody is in the process inventing a very smart scheme that we haven't yet realized will be the system that can work. But if we don't have forward trajectory on pricing, we cannot go and buy, or anyone cannot go, or it's much harder to go and buy ships, much harder to go and retrofit. It's much harder to off-take the fuel. And about off-taking of the hydrogen-based fuels, well, today, the whole pension funds, investment industry, there's billions and billions waiting to employ it. And there's a lot of projects under the current, under the radar, that's not public at the moment. And they're all looking for who can off-take hydrogen-based fuels in the future at a cost of about 500 euro per metric tons. However, if you don't have demand certainty, it's a very, very brave punt, and I dare to say punt, to go and take a 10-year off-take on a commodity where you don't know if regulation is there. So we much rather have a clear global IMO-led government regulation, less than a cap and trade system for that reason. The EU ETS scheme, we don't know yet how it will look. We think it will push the agenda forward within the IMO, yeah, and that's good, by the way. So that's great, but whether that's good for global shipping is a question mark. We have yet to see it, yeah.
And thank you very much, both to Rasmus and Evan for developing the discussion further. I mean, you've highlighted certain issues which are very particular to the industry. I mean, one criticism of the IMO is that it is a slow-moving body. So that means that there is now, over periods of time, there could be a vacuum within the markets and industry as to what the direction of travel should be. I mean, all of you here are, and your organizations are participants in various bodies which have been set up within the maritime industry to promote the decarbonisation agenda. So whether that's the Getting to Zero Coalition, the Sea Cargo Charter, Poseidon Principles. So, I mean, there is nevertheless movement within the industry towards the 2050 goal. So what I'm interested in to see is that, well, okay, we understand that there's going to be a lag when it comes to regulation and legislation, but people appear to be proactive and taking initiatives. So how do those two marry? I mean, what is the, let's say, the incentive of doing this? Is it maybe to pressure the industry as a whole and to create, you know, from industry participants incentives in order to meet these targets?
Yeah, maybe if I could just start, George. I think it's interesting to look back in history at the way large-scale legislation has evolved in the shipping industry and with the IMO. And if you look back to Open 90 and the double hull legislation, initially after the Exxon Valdez, the U.S. legislated Open 90, mandating double hull tankers. There was a big pushback in the industry, but very quickly the IMO adopted that. So what we might see here is, you know, probably the EU and maybe other jurisdictions leading the way, which then gets, you know, very quickly adopted once everybody can see the writing on the wall. So I think that's one aspect of it. The other thing is that there's more going on now than we would ever have expected without legislation in place, and the pressure is coming from somewhere. And I think the Heidelberg Cement case study is a very interesting one. So, you know, we shouldn't discount the impact of consumer preference, customer needs, pressure from boardrooms, et cetera, to make a shift sooner. And then once those kind of early adopters sufficiently lead the way, then it's really up to the rest of the industry to follow along. But it does require a legislative framework. It just seems that the only way to make this happen, if you're going to rely on market forces, is through some kind of a carbon tax. The problem is the numbers are huge. You know, Rasmus, I did a quick calculation. I think we're collecting about $150 billion of cash every year under the scheme, which we think is necessary to level the playing field. And then maybe we need a bank or two to be custodians for that. So maybe you can give some thought to what to do with the money. I think it's crazy to think that as an industry we're going to be able to hold on to that kind of money. $2 a ton is probably more, you know, more the right scale. The IMO is more than just a group of ship owners, obviously. So I can imagine that would get redistributed, and as long as it's fair, that's fine. The point of it is to level the playing field, because ultimately fuel is a voyage cost. Now, Rasmus, from where you sit, you might look at it differently, but, you know, for us, you know, that's how you make voyage choices in part. So, you know, those are some thoughts, you know, to consider.
You know, Rasmus, one of there are lots of calculations on how much it costs to decarbonize. There's, I think, some degree of consensus emerging around $25 a ton for internal shadow pricing that some companies use in which to judge their own projects. If you take a look at what Trafigura is looking at in terms of a shadow price for driving action today, do you do any internal trade-offs based on a carbon price today?
We have not done it so far. It's being discussed. We're trying to find a framework how to do it. It's not easy. We haven't found the right software sort of that can help us on voyage basis. Yeah, but I think it will have to come over the next 12 months for a lot of charterers and owners, and sort of that will help the realization of where we're going. But to answer your question in specific terms, no, Arlie, not yet.
It is remarkable to see the progress at Heidelberg Cement and how they achieved it. I know one of the hallmarks of all the conversations we're in is this collaboration. Jim Lawrence picked it up really powerfully in the introduction. I was struck, I think I heard that they've got a backhaul voyage for their clinker with grain going back to Norway, maybe. I didn't quite pick that up. But the notion of using the assets more efficiently to satisfy the logistical requirements is a key part of this. As we look at the players involved, often they're in one commodity or another. But Trafigura is in a unique position. You can see the backhaul and the front haul voyage. Do you see more higher utilization of the assets that's going to come from this initiative? More cargo
For
carried?
sure, yeah. For sure, the general decarbonization push will push the chartering teams to fix ships closer to your load port. So there will be a very conscious assessment of a ship which is coming in ballast from South America versus a ship that's coming open in Greece for a cargo that loads in the Black Sea. So there will be a factoring in mentally and over time also financially, maybe already in 2021, but I cannot say with certainty. But for sure, there's much more focus, without yet putting any extra cost on, but it may come in the future, to take ships that are nearer to your load port. And I think for the ship owner, the same mentality will happen in terms of, well, we may be able to make $500 per day more for going to Gibraltar rather than going into the Black Sea, but we take the Black Sea voyage because our CO2 calculation looks better. Like it would be for Trafigura, maybe we have to pay 2.5 world scale points more for the ship that's open into Greece rather than in Gibraltar, because that supports. So that's sort of a soft first thing that I think is likely to happen for the industry, to take the first step of a minor decarbonization. And that's without the regulatory framework or anything. I think this will happen naturally. But then, of course, the question is, when do you pay 10 world scale points more? And when is the owner willing to accept a lower return for going in shorter ballast? This is the question mark. And I think that thought process will mature throughout 2021, which is positive.
Because I wanted actually to pick up on this issue of and the topic of collaboration, because certainly in our thought leadership report, that was our conclusion. We called it the shared direction of travel, and that wasn't just us saying this; it was the people we interviewed. Consider that this is too big a topic for one body or one group in order to meet. It of course will require collaboration, and going back to the introduction which Jim Lawrence made as well, where he talked about someone joking about, well, there's no collaboration in shipping, but he said that we need collaboration before competition and teamwork and innovation. But and as I mentioned some initiatives that a number of you are participating in. But given the fragmented nature of shipping, given the price pressures that are faced everywhere, and let's say the mismatch in regulations across the world, and the lack of an overarching regulatory framework, how do you see? I mean, some of you have already sort of alluded to this, but how do you see this collaboration being developed in the next few years until we achieve this regulatory framework?
I'm happy to jump in, Yorgos. First of all, if we take a step back and just think about the overall explosion of focus on the environment and ESG that's happened over the last few years, it's been a wellspring of different organizations, different partnerships pop up, all done organically. And I don't want to forget the responsible ship recycling groups as well, which have made a really big impact on recycling too. All of these things have really come out of, dare I say it, the kind of desire for people to act on climate change and the desire for people to do better for the world, which is incredible and amazing to see. So for me, it's multifaceted in the sense that you are going to have these organic groups targeting maybe micro issues, more regional groups. I think the Scandinavians and the Norwegians have picked up many of these and banded together, whether or not it's ship owning associations or different regional groups. I think as we get into the thornier issues and you know what we talked about before is the almost $1 trillion need for the research and development and to change the future transportation methods of our world. This is when we're going to have to move from these different organically built organizations to a larger, broader regulatory framework, again, that has teeth. And I go back to some of the comments that Rasmus made about changing the way that the IMO views its mandate around this important issue as mission critical to achieving our goals. The IMO really, I think, has to play the pivotal role here. And already you're seeing, some of the regulations that they're bringing in the 2023 framework really being the ones that drive change. And I think they need to take up that mantle, but we should not ignore all of the excellent work that's being done on a regional and a kind of industry subsegment basis.
George, if I could just share my view on this. I think that Evan's being very modest. I think that the banks have played a critical role in the process so far and will continue to play so. And because they're channeling capital into the industry and have set new standards for doing so via the Poseidon principles, it's that direction, that flow of cash, which is so critical, that's going to drive change. And I just want to highlight that the player that is not at the table currently are the shipyards. And frankly, I think that's appropriate. The area that the last thing we need to do right now in our industry is rush forward to building ships which don't exist, that can't deliver the net zero ambitions that we must have to meet the Paris Accords. It's going to be an internal effort, incremental effort driven by the collaborative programs, the leadership of people like Trafigura and Ardmore that are going to create transitional steps, finding efficient charters, retrofitting ships, taking advantage of those opportunities. The technology, the 50,000 deadweight ton hydrogen powered ship made from steel that didn't emit any carbon in its production, that's probably 5, maybe 10 years away. So we have to focus on those practical intermediate steps immediately, see where they can take us, how far they can take us. My suspicion is the industry can reduce its fuel consumption by on the order of 20% by taking a combination of synergistic small steps forward with the business right now. But let's not be building ships. Let me just remind you why we're all so excited to be talking about, for example, the dry bulk market right now. It's not because there's a wave of new eco ships that emit zero. It's because there are no new ships being built. And probably keep in mind that that's the area that the industry has handled least well, building lots of new tonnage. So let's focus on maximizing the value of the existing fleet, keeping owners like Tony with the access to funds that allow him to make the incremental steps forward to reduce fuel consumption.
George, if I can jump in, I think, Arlie, thanks. I think you hit on a very important topic, which isn't discussed enough, and that's efficiency. And when we look at efficiency, we think about it on 3 levels: logistical efficiency, which is really more in the hands of the charterers and the major end users. But then there's operational efficiency, optimizing the voyage, which of course helps because you then maximize your TCE performance. And then there's technical efficiency, where you can actually improve the performance of vessels through retrofits and better monitoring on board. And I think you're spot on. That number is probably around 20%. And that's really significant. And that could be achieved almost immediately if we would just approach it in the right way as an industry. I think collaboration is key, but also setting up the conditions for a different type of efficient application of market forces is also important. And that's why gradually building up carbon tax structure to make all these new fuels competitive with enough timeline and lead time to plan for it is key. And just generally speaking, the more expensive the fuel becomes, the more efficient the transportation network will be in delivering products and services. So we're not afraid of high fuel prices. In fact, in a way, it's better. So, but it's got to be a level playing field. So.
Just a quick comment back to your comment for Tony on the $2. In the initial stages, when new zero low carbon ships are coming in, you don't need the whole world fleet to have a $250 to $300 tax, because there will be so few ships who needs to get funded. So it's only as progression comes with a lot of ships coming in that levy is required. It will be gradually coming up, and then technology costs will come down for making hydrogen-based fuels. Just to elaborate on that.
That's a pity, because as an industry we could use that kind of money on a long-term basis. But anyway, so, no, but that's a very good point.
Just one question that I had, if we have time, because I see we've been minimized because we've come to the hour. But if I could just ask the question, because Rasmus, you made a reference to it, that Trafigura is speaking to the IMO and the IMO representatives and other NGOs. I mean, because what would be interesting, I think, for people to hear are, other than Trafigura's initiatives, other initiatives where there is engagement with the regulators. Because I think one thing that has certainly come out of this discussion today is that there needs to be a level playing field, and regulation needs to take the lead on this, to ensure that there is such a level playing field and people are incentivized and rewarded for meeting those regulations. But any comment anyone wants to say in terms of steps which are being taken, and for the IMO representatives to understand, one, the key role that the industry views that they can play, and secondly, the need to do this within a relatively short period of time.
I can make a comment. Oh, sorry, Rasmus.
No, go ahead.
I'll just make a quick comment, because I'm not often accused of modesty, but the banks are increasingly becoming all over this. And it's not just the small cadre of Western European / Scandinavian banks. The Federal Reserve in January has put together kind of a climate action task force. And you may have seen recently in February, Governor Brainerd made a very important policy speech in his capacity as a Fed governor on climate change. This follows a number of the other important central banks around the world, whether it's the United Kingdom or Norway, that have been on this issue. And so I think increasingly you're going to see lots more focus from the financial community. And at least speaking on behalf of DNB and its involvement in the Poseidon Principles, we really welcome more stakeholders from more geographic, dare I say, Eastern locations to join into this important fight.
And just on that note, Evan, I mean, it's a historical challenge. There's historical opportunity, but there's also historical responsibility. And responsibility also sits within the industry to go and push the IMO member nations and the Intertankos, the BIMCOs, the ICSs, because they're driven on consensus basis, and that's the only way that they can get the mandate to go into the IMO. So the ship owners also themselves and the charters have a big responsibility to go and tell regulators what we want. And we need to do that very firmly and strongly, so they realize that the industry actually is there to support a solution. I'm not saying it's our proposal, but it's a solution that the industry will be there to support. And then the IMO member delegates, of course, they have a huge responsibility to pick up what the industry and the society is telling them. So, and more can be done, much more can be done in this space to influence the regulators and bring them forward, help bring them forward.
That's great, Rasmus. Thank you for that, and George, thank you very much for running the panel. We are out of time. I think we could probably keep going all day on this, but it's been a great discussion, a great start today. I really truly believe these kinds of conversations among leading stakeholders like you, they do advance this discussion. It is a matter historic responsibility, as Rasmus pointed out. So I want to thank you for collaborating with us as we try to kind of provide a platform for the industry to move forward. We're going to take a break for about half an hour, and we're going to come back and talk about the ship finance market. Obviously, the CapEx and the amount of funding required to make a transition like this is massive. So we're looking forward to that discussion. So you've got about 30 minutes. Have a coffee, take a walk, and we'll see you soon. And thanks again for being with us, everyone.
Thanks very much, Matt.
Thank you all.
Bye.